I mean, American officials, to include the secretary, have said that there's no direct evidence linking Iran to this specific Hamas-led attack. First, is there any update on that assessment? And then second, can you elaborate a bit on what the U.S. would consider direct involvement by the Iranians?
So we do not have any information to suggest that Iran either directed or orchestrated these attacks by Hamas. Iran likely knew that Hamas was planning operations against Israel, but without the precise timing or scope of what occurred. Iran has, of course, long supported Hamas with material and financial support, but we have not yet seen anything to suggest that they supported or were behind this current attack. But our experience in these matters tell us that it's premature to draw any final conclusions about this issue. We'll be looking at additional intelligence in the coming weeks and days to inform our thinking on this issue, including whether at least there were some in the Iranian system who either had a clear sense of what was coming or even contributed to aspects of the planning.
If you'll allow me one more.
Sure.
I mean, so the Egyptians claim to have issued explicit and direct warnings to the Israelis that something was coming from Gaza and from Hamas. Does the U.S. have independent knowledge of any of those warnings, either being issued to Israel or receiving them directly from the Egyptians themselves?
I will let Israel speak to any conversations they had with Egypt. Go ahead, Shannon.
Thank you. Back to Iran. Looking at how if the regime had direct knowledge of an attack, the timing of it, how much does that matter to the administration, given what you know, the material support, the military support, the millions of dollars you've been funneling into this organization, Hamas?
So I will say that first of all, I wouldn't want to get ahead of what this assessment may ultimately find. We are in the early days after these attacks. Our first focus has been on helping Israel respond to these attacks, but we will continue to examine all intelligence and collect new intelligence, collect new information, talk with our Israeli partners about anything that they find. But I will say, as we have made clear, that Iran has long supported Hamas. Hamas would not be what it is today without the financial and material backing that they have gotten from Iran. So, yes, we very much do believe that Iran is at least complicit in these attacks, even if we do not yet have any evidence to show that they directed or orchestrated them.
Will that complicity, will there be any kind of response? I know you don't want to get into specifics, but...
So I wouldn't want to preview any actions that we might take. We have taken a number of actions since the beginning of this administration to hold Iran accountable for its malign activities in the region, including its support for terrorism. That includes more than 400 sanctions that we have imposed on Iran. We will continue to take actions to hold Iran accountable, but I wouldn't want to preview from here what those might look like.
Follow up on that.
Go ahead, and then I'll come to Abby.
There's been some talk, especially among Republicans, about refreezing the $6 billion in funds that had been transferred to Qatar to secure the release of the Americans. Is that under consideration?
So I think you're talking about the funds that come from Iranian oil revenue that I've heard people say could be used to fund malign activities. I want to give a very clear response. So if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to read something here. Iran will have zero oil revenue to spend on any of these things. Let me say that again, zero. 100% of the revenue that Iran receives from the sale of crude oil will be held in foreign accounts and can be used by Iran only for humanitarian trade or bilateral trade in non-sanctioned goods and services. And I will point out that is not a quote from anyone in this administration. That is a quote from former Secretary Mike Pompeo, delivered at the State Department on November 2nd, 2018, when he established the accounts that yielded this revenue that Iran is now has access to, with additional restrictions that we have imposed on them to ensure that not only that they can only be used for humanitarian trade, not bilateral trade in non-sanctioned goods, only humanitarian purposes, and we have ongoing mechanisms. Now, with respect to what we might do in the future, we have the ability to freeze those funds if we need to. We've not made any decisions.
Matt, that's fine, but it doesn't matter who said it. Whoever said it was wrong, because the money, if Iran has a promise of money, they can use their own money that they have inside their own country, knowing to do whatever with it. They could buy medicine, they could buy food, whatever. They could rebuild a bridge, they could do that. But they know that they have $6 billion sitting in Qatar right now. Okay? So whether Secretary Pompeo said it and said that the money would only be used for that purpose, or whether you guys are saying, yes, maybe that specific dollar with that serial note, the serial number, or that euro with that serial number on it, can't be used to fund terrorism. But the fact of the matter is, and you guys know this, is that it allows or it frees up money that Iran has already inside its own country to use for other things. So they don't have to spend that money on
So
non-sanctioned items.
let me say two things about that. One, the reason I read this exact quote is I have heard a fair bit of criticism about this money, including from the person who said this in November of 2018. And I thought it was fair to point out that this money was first allowed to accrue into these accounts under the Trump administration. And that's a point you
back
did
then as well.
You did, and there are a number of people who have had a lot to say about this the last few days who have conveniently forgot that fact, which is why I thought it was important to remind the world. The second thing I will say is that Iran has, of course, always funded terrorism. They have always funded malign activities in the region, and that's why we have always taken action to hold them account. But this money can only be used for humanitarian purposes. Not a cent of it has been spent
But
at
that
this
is
point,
not the
and we
argument
have
that
the
people
ability
are
to freeze it at any time.
That is not the criticism that you're getting. The criticism you're getting is that this frees up money inside Iran that they can use for malign purposes, as you said.
And there is just no evidence that that is accurate. When we
Well,
have seen,
is there
when we
any
have seen,
evidence
when we
that
have
isn't
seen,
accurate?
when we have
Can you
the evidence.
Can you say that there's no evidence that Iran has used money over the course of the last month or month and a half since the money arrived in Qatar to send to Hamas? Can you say
Iran
that? Do you
has
know?
funded terrorism before these accounts were established during the Trump administration. They have funded terrorism after these accounts were established in the Trump administration. They will no doubt continue to fund terrorism in the future, which is why we have sought to hold them accountable. With respect to this money, it cannot be used for anything but humanitarian purposes. We have strict oversight, we have strict visibility, and if we see it being used for anything else, we can shut it down immediately.